Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind word of introduction. I would like to welcome you for my part as well. Light and people. I have to start my timer here. You can see here a human couple on the left-hand side of the sun, and on the right-hand side, an energy-saving light bulb that has been heavily under discussion. The sun was there already before us, and the energy-saving light bulb might be around when we are not anymore. So, and if you can see that the waste will be brought to the waste dump in Hanover with all the mercury, and so for generations this toxic substance will be around that we're trying to save on now. So how am I going to move from the sun to these energy-saving light bulbs, the artificial light? In particular, when human beings are embedded in between the two. So what had to happen so that we as human beings could be brought forward? First of all, we needed a stable system, a planet. There should be water on that planet, and this planet is to be part of a solar system, and there are heavy elements as well. So, for example, iron, all of this has to be part of it, and the first of this system, during the first days, there were only light elements around and not the heavy elements anymore. So the big sun burst, and the heavy elements were then spread and left with us as dust, so to speak. So before we had this first solar system, we had to have matter to start with, chemical elements, energy, radiation, and prior to that, there was the Big Bang. What was prior to the Big Bang? The Big Bang is seen as a singular event. We can't say what existed before the Big Bang, but everything coming after that can be defined with physical means, quantum physics, and we try to approach these elements. If you then start with this chronological order, the Big Bang, then you can take a detour here. I'm not a quantum physicist myself, but the primordial soup was boiling at a high temperature. It then cooled down quite quickly. 420 million years it took until the radiation broke down into light, colorful light, and matter. So the separation of matter and light was 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Seen from today, it was happening at 1.7 billion years. And here you can see this aggregation disk aggravating the matter at the center. It could be a model for the first solar system, bringing forward the heavier elements from which we stem. The next solar system is closer to ours. Here you can see the Earth and the Moon, and this system that was established, so to speak, in the second go contains already more heavier elements in our bodies. They help to compose our bodies, and all heavy elements communicate through light and radiation with one another by emitting or absorbing light. Now, radiation, the solar radiation, can be displayed in this curve on the left-hand side. So you have a steep increase, the ultraviolet area, then the peak and the green area, and then a slow decrease with regard to the intensity for the longer wave, the infrared area that is, and where the sun is the strongest, which is more than 40% of the solar radiation is broken down into the visible light. Now, why is this the playground for life, as I've entitled this slide? Well, all transformation processes, all evolutionary processes are performed following this one logic. quantities, light quantities, are ranging around these 3 electron volts, when we talk about the visible light, that is, and this quantum energy is exploited in every transformational step, in that the chemical reactions tap them just a little bit, tap a little bit of this quantum energy, and then the energy has decreased to such an extent that you have only, say, 0.1 electronic volts, and instead of a rhythmic radiation coming from the sun, we have a continuous residual heat emission with a peak of 10,000 nanometers. So the more long-wave light we have, the more long-wave heat we have, the less our organism will use it. What's biologically exploitable is the radiation from this area, because then it can be universally applied. It can be used for very specific photochemical reactions. It can also be translated into thermal energy. And this warmth then can be, for example, the pool for our bodily warmth, bodily heat, and we radiate that too. Now, interestingly enough, we exudate this heat with 10,000 nanometers. We radiate gases, and we have to release them, the long-wave substances, so that our body is able to absorb new light impulses. The solar light that we saw in the curve earlier on can display it in astrological manner too. So in these lines, you can see just one section of the visible spectrum, and you have 50 of them in total. Then you have gaps. These are the Fraunhofer lines. This is kind of like radiation suction, and between the lines you have radiation pressure in between the Fraunhofer lines. Now, what does this characterize? Well, the distribution of the Fraunhofer lines clearly displays what elements can be found on the Sun. For example, analyzing the Fraunhofer lines led us to discover the helium before we discovered it on Earth. Now, this distribution reminds me of kind of a barcode, where you have the product ID, each product wearing its individual tag, and the Sun has such a tag too, and we can then read from it what chemical substances are contained in it. Also, the Sun has a very slow pulse, which is 294 seconds, and so in this pulsating movement of some 5 minutes, you can tell that the Fraunhofer lines move, which is to say, in its internal structure, the sunlight is highly specific. And in the foreseeable future, we will not be able to generate artificial light in such a way that it will copy all characteristics of sunlight. Now, this is the Earth. We have movements, a rotational movement, which creates the day-night rhythm. Even the simplest forms of life are following this rhythm. It's glued into any kind of life's genetic substance, and we're all well consulted to have our own biorhythm and know it. Now, this clock leads to a 24-hour rhythm, the difference between darkness and brightness, and the rotational movement around the Sun leads to the different seasons, and we will look to its consequences in a minute. Life, take for example one single cell, as you can see it here. Life has a certain color distribution. You have ultraviolet and shortwave radiations in the nucleus and in the DNA. This is where we would expect the origin of control mechanisms with biophotons. And in the outskirts, so to speak, you know what this is, this structure, right? It's a mitochondria. It's like the power plant. They are a little more remote, so that no sensitive issues will happen if such a power plant explodes. Yeah, mitochondria can explode as well by oxygen radicals. They're constantly generated, and you can have a shortcut with dual membranes, and it can actually bring forth permanent harm for a cell. And here you have the different colors of light in the cell. So the power plants, the mitochondria, if they are located here in the long wave area, then you can say that mitochondrium has 500 to 2,000 nanometers with regard to its order of magnitude. So you can actually trigger the energy budget of a cell by certain resonance mechanisms. And you have, for example, these vesicles from the Golgi apparatus, and this is important for the synthetic processes in the cells. And what is actually predominant in certain domains of the cell can lead to either larger or smaller carrier bags, if you like. And, of course, the internal clock is also found in this cell. Now, if you have 100,000 chemical reactions per second per cell, if you have 10 to the power of 14 or sometimes 15 bodily cells, then this is just a small extract of what's happening in such cells. Just try and follow one of these photons, and you will see that they are sometimes chopped into pieces and then put together again. You have spectral tests. You can stay on with this for hours. I don't have the time, I'm afraid, but I'd like to give you this image, the image that the biophotons, generally speaking, are the flowing water, while the different wheels are driven by this flowing water. And so you have kind of a step-by-step process designed by the photons. And this is why we can not measure it that easily from the outside. There's a lot of busy bees around, so to speak, and you can maybe measure what comes out of it or goes in again, and you can actually link it to others, but then it makes a larger sense. You can allocate this, but my computer would break down on this. Anyway, so it's like a grinding mill, if you like, and by exploiting the photon's energy, by exploiting the quantum energies, this carousel is kept alive. And here, for example, you have the citric acid cycle, just to hint at that. Now, this is the solar pool. I showed you that. We can say now that the membranes, when hit by a light, are brought into vibration. And so you have a kind of like photoelectric effect. This is not only true for metal plates, but also for biological plates, i.e. membranes. It may actually lead to a situation where the capillary vesicles may be exposed to diffusion processes. I told you that there is a radiation suction and a radiation pulse. Anyway, this can be having effects on the membranes of an individual cell too. Well, cells have the tendency to build multicellular structures with other cells. It's something that we find with water as well. Water moves similar to light, and up here you can see different patterns of movement for water, for example, like this or like that. The water can move like this, and then you have backwards and forwards movements at the same time. And when you combine these, then these possible movements lead to certain resonances, in particular in the infrared area, where water is highly absorbing. So if you expose the body to light, and if the light then gets in touch with water, then there are very specific interactions between the two. What is more, individual water molecules have the tendency to create individual clusters, and they actually have they then build multicellular structures. How the water got moving, if you have an unprotected cell over here, and if you then have this cell dependent on a thermo and substrate pool, then it becomes clear that they can only survive within water. And this is where the origin of life can be found. But similar to the water, the cells got together to produce multicellular structures while trying to take the water with them. Now, obviously, forming such groups was improving the perspective for survival. On the other hand, you needed an information infrastructure and a share of the workload, because not all cells could do the same job. There were inner cells working in the inner environment, but they would have to be protected against evaporation, for example, so they had to be protected by outer cells, and outer cells would have different functions. And here you have an example from 230 million years ago. This is the concept of how the water got going. What this turtle managed to do is to maintain the inner environment, and what also managed to do is to leave the equatorial zone, but it wasn't able to take the sun energy with it. It's actually busy for 30% of the day to look after its thermal regulation, and when the winter comes, is to dig itself and reduce metabolism, and then reduce also the pulse frequency. And if you then hop onto another form of the evolution, and you have the homeotrophic animals, then you will find completely different conditions. So they can live anywhere. Warm-blooded animals don't have to focus on what the thermal environment is. They can survive during the winter too. A winter is an extreme challenge. Do you know the bodily weight that an elk loses over the winter month in percent? 20, up to 25% of bodily weight is lost during the winter month. Now, what do they have to do during the summer months? Then they don't only have to top it up, they also have to move, they have to multiply themselves, they have to fight for a good position in the hierarchy. So the winter operation mode and the summer operation mode means a huge change. It's similar to the change between day routine and night routine. And what we can say is like the share of radiation coming from solar light and how it changes between summer and winter is the UV ultraviolet B light. And it's actually the most dangerous one for living cells. If UVB radiation will hit a living cell, the probability that the cells will be harmed, genetically harmed, is rather high. Here you see the constant conditions around the equatorial zone, but in Northern America, for example, the summer has 16 hours of light, the winter north of it has 16 hours of darkness, and so this is a massive implication for our nervous and bodily system. Now, from the warm-blooded animal to the Homo sapiens, it was quite a long way. As I showed you, the area around the equatorial zone was rather positive for the development of human beings, and this broadening here shows you to what extent the Homo erectus would intrude milder climate zones. Climate, radiations, color of the skin was a huge issue. Apes had a skin similar to this couple, with a bright pigmentation. Our skin would have to develop in such a way that we could handle the radiation because we were unprotected with bare skin, so to speak. We would have to be able to process that, and depending on where our predecessors lived, our skin has this pigmentation, that pigmentation, so there are different challenges for the skin. The pigmentation in the equatorial zone, for example, is to protect the capillary structures where the blood flows, so that folic acid, for example, is maintained, or that cholesterol or other hormones, they're rather sensitive with regard to UV radiation, and they could be discomposed.
This pigmentation gives us some protection, and in the moderate climates, the task is to allow as much light as possible to penetrate the human skin, whereas in summertime you want to be protected from sunlight. This had to be learned. All cultures, all ancient cultures, therefore, had very specific rituals and cults to do with sunlight, and to deal with the question as to how to deal with sunlight locally. So solar behavior cannot be globalized. The rules applying here for us are quite different than would apply to me if I lived in Australia, for example. So there's no globalization for how to behave in sunlight. If we read Plato, we find the solar parable. For him, the sun is the highest, truest, and absolute, and these writings by Plato are a kind of foreshadowing of what we experience now. But what does the cave story say by Plato? Our senses, the eye, for example, is a sensory organ which can be deceived very easily. We are tethered by our senses to a cave, and the real world we can only see as a kind of shadow, but the actual cause of that shadow are some figures which other beings hold up into the fire. So they don't hold it up into the sun, they hold it simply into fire. So it's extremely indirect. This fire, however, has been a good companion to us during evolution. Fire makes life easier, and however, you shouldn't exaggerate. When the light bulb was invented, it was then our victory over the sun, as we've managed. We have become independent, finally. What also has happened is our victory over night time. This is the world at night, the way it's lit in 2007, with a rising trend. This is what Lago Maggiore looks like at night, and this is what Times Square is like at night, which is even worse. We now know that too much artificial light at nighttime, too little sunlight at daytime can have drastic consequences for our mid to long-term health. And if you look at these diagrams, we have to say that civilization is a health risk. Of course, if we are non-civilized or a developing country, there is also a health risk. The mortality rate is, for example, 9 times higher, and you are 10 times more likely to die from infections and parasites. But in our countries, you die twice as frequently of cardiovascular diseases and cancer. 2/3 of our deaths are caused by cardiovascular causes and cancer. And it's now been found that there is some kind of link, or could be some kind of link, between the modern Plato's cave, although we are not tethered to the cave, but we are living in these caves. And even if it's summertime and if lots of sunlight is shining on this cave, you get 20 degrees temperature inside of this cave. We have installed the equator in our living rooms, and we are sort of kind of tethered to the cave and to some creature comforts which tether us to the cave, be that information or entertainment. Now, unfortunately, my journey through evolution has taken me longer than planned, but we'll come to the next point, the mechanisms by which external light can program us for certain vegetative mechanisms, which is the mechanism which synchronizes our internal clock, our circadian system, which is located somewhere near the pineal gland or the nucleus suprachiasmaticus. Now, this also is linked by nerve fibers to all organs, this pineal gland, and it makes sure that these internal organs cooperate properly. This picture gives us some idea as to how these regulation mechanisms work. On the one hand, we have the effect of sunlight on skin and on various skin layers. And what is focused here in this diagram is vitamin D as a sun hormone, as a signal to say that we have a higher share of UVB light in our environment, and the dark hormone. Cyclically speaking, there is a constant change between day and night. We have extreme light in summertime, and we have extreme dark conditions at wintertime or at night. And these regulative mechanisms are mediated by the dark hormone melatonin, and there is a separate signal path which comes in the eye. So we have got two senses by which our body analyzes the external conditions. One is the skin, which is a much more broad-based sensory organ or sense other than the eye. The eye is just focused on visible light. The eye cannot see UV and cannot see infrared. The skin, however, perceives warmth. You will get sunburned if there is too much sunlight. So the skin has a much broader range of capturing sunlight or light. The eye, however, is not just responsible for seeing. There is also the veterinary hypothalamus tract, which connects nerve fibers to the circadian rhythm, to the internal clock, and there is a mediation between the pineal gland, which perceives dark, and the pituitary gland, which perceives light. Now, this is a picture which shows how important a normal or optimum vitamin D supply is. Vitamin D deficiency is associated with a general increase in mortality. This should, I think, be enough. Otherwise, this whole picture could keep us busy for a whole presentation. But what is important is that light and dark should be just as equally important. Breathing in is just as important as breathing out. Diastole, systole, there's always this balance. And one opponent or counterpart of melatonin light is melatonin. It promotes sleep, it promotes cell regeneration, reduces energy production, it is a scavenger, it inhibits aromatase and estrogen. What would you say? Do we need melatonin? Seems like we do, absolutely. It's a no-brainer. However, the more the the share of blue in our ambient light is, the more melatonin is suppressed. And this will happen, for example, and this is a preview into the energy-saving lamps, which have a very high blue share. If we switch them on at night, then the melatonin formation is inhibited more than if we were using a candle or an incandescent light bulb, conventional light bulb. This is a fact which can be studied. If you think, let's switch off our energy-saving lamp, please don't forget, if you're working on your computer at night, the color of your screen has to be adjusted to warm colors. Otherwise, you also have blue light, especially if you're working on a white page with black text. This also suppresses melatonin, and your TV screen also has 5,000 Kelvin. That's the way it's shipped. The TV screen, you should ask yourselves whether you want to have this color and whether there may be competition with your melatonin formation. Now, in order to illustrate this, the day starts in the red spectrum, so it's focused on red. When the sun rises, we have visible light and invisible light, and under high noon conditions, we have UVA and UVB, so the full spectrum. This light looks bluish, so we're talking about roughly 6,500 Kelvin in terms of color temperature. Towards the evening, the color temperature goes down again. This is the natural color progression, which is disrupted sometimes. Employers also have understood if they play around with these light colors, the performance of people working can be changed. Light doping in Hamburg, 5 million euros have been paid to give the classroom the chance to select color temperature by the teacher can select color temperature by 3 buttons. He can simulate or reassure or calm down their pupils. This has been published many places about light temperature at schools. Now let's look at the penetration depth of visual radiation, optical radiation. The longer wave the color is, the deeper it penetrates. The deepest penetration can be found in the red and infrared A wavelength field. These are wavelengths which cannot be found in the LED or in the discharge lamp. This means that the incandescent lamp, when that was introduced, we have said goodbye to thermal light, and we only have orange and shorter wave light colors which hit the eye, and the rest is not shone on by any type of light colors. The deeper the light can penetrate into the body, the better it is tolerated. That's the general rule. Every part of this solar radiation has specific effects. For example, cholecalciferol formation based on 7-dehydrocholesterol in the epidermis, and folic acid can be destroyed by UVB light in the skin, in the vascular layers. UVA doesn't just have a negative effect, a damaging effect on cells. Whole body UVA radiation will reduce systemic blood pressure, for example. It also means that the nitric oxide secretion is improved, blood circulation is improved, and there is an enzyme which is inhibited by NO. So to counteract that, we need infrared A in order to release this and to drive out the NO. So these are synergetic effects. There are balances, various types, which we can expect for various shares of the light. The water molecule, for example, will react very much to infrared B or infrared C. Anything which is longer wave than 2000 nanometers, however, will not penetrate the body. This is an example of saying that one of the same type of radiation has different effects. For example, vitamin D3 is formed at the superficial layers of the skin. The UVB, which goes into the papillae, has an impact on folic acid as one example of ingredients of our blood. And this also is an interesting picture. Imagine our body includes various pots of pigments, so chemical substances which perceive or receive radiation in various wavelengths. This is typical for pigments. And these skin layers, in this case the epidermis, has the effect of a filter. So it will fill up with the shortest wave and the longest wave radiation most, and what penetrates most are the visible, the near-infrared lights or colors. Now, the concerted effects of sunlight. This is a skin model showing the penetration depth of UVB, UVA, and so on. And this chart shows the effects of our visual radiation. UVB doesn't normally play a bigger role because it is filtered by atmospheric layers. UVC. When it comes to actinotherapy, that is the formation, the active formation of vitamin D. Vitamin D is used for that purpose. Also, it is a kind of shield against sunburns. For 20 years, sunscreens have just filtered out UVB. And if you apply those creams, the only warning signal telling me when I had too much sunlight, it is the reddening of the skin. This warning signal is switched off by this sunscreen, as if you're in your car and the oil lamp comes on and you just remove the lamp because you feel irritated by this oil lamp. But today, people are surprised to find that when efficient UVB sunscreens were improved, there was an increase in skin cancer. The experts have a debate about how it comes. Is it because the sunlight is so nasty, or is it because we are doing something completely wrong? UVA, serotonin synthesis, for example. This is very important. If we do not have enough serotonin, which is formed at daytime and it is stored in the pineal gland, that at nighttime not enough melatonin will be formed because serotonin is a precursor of melatonin. And for chromotherapy, this is not the right time to do that because it would take me too long to explain these different colors. But infrared, again, has an antioxidative effect in the mitochondria, increases cell respiration. It removes NO from the binding site in cytochrome C oxidase. It stimulates the fibroblasts. It influences the skin texture, for example. Infrared B is a thermotherapy. The water molecules and clusters are moved like magnetic stirrers, and this improves the function or the activation. Thermotherapy using long-wave infrared C works based on the irritation of the skin surface, so it doesn't go as deep as infrared A by far. This area, photobiomodulation, is also very well investigated in terms of wound healing processes. One example of a physiological skin reaction, which is created by UVB over a course of 4 weeks. If we go, when we want to go to the sun, out of the sun, we have to bear in mind that it's very long-term, this change. It means at least one cell generation until keratinocytes have migrated to the outside. This is as long as it takes, 28 days, until the skin has adjusted fully to the solar conditions. So it's no good to go to the sunshine, to the beaches for 3 days, because the skin is too slow in reacting to this. Physiology will not work properly. Heliotherapy. There are ideas that even with the ancient Egyptians, because we have these pictures, heliotherapy was maybe in place. There was light hygiene at least. Whether there was salutogenesis on the part of the ancient Egyptians can be assumed. Someone who had a full command over healing with the sun was Auguste Rollier. One aspect was prophylaxis. He sent kids out of the cities into the mountains, Swiss mountains, and they were trained there at wintertime and summertime. They had to wear hats, though, which is very important for heliotherapy. And here we see a child with tuberculosis with 35 foci. It was death, was really fatally diseased. And with this therapy, sun therapy, in the space of 2 years, between hospitalization and the last picture, this child had a full recovery just by the use of sunlight. Looking at the secondary effects of light, which were first described in 1926, we find that the sugar balance of metabolism, fatty metabolism, protein metabolism is improved by sunlight. We can see reduction of blood pressure under the influence of sunlight. There is a stimulation of immuno response because of sunlight, and all these effects can be seen very clearly when there is a pathologic change, and these functions can be normalized using light or sunlight therapy. Now for the question whether our artificial light means that we live in biological darkness, in actual darkness. We have a hunger for light, which we satisfy, which we sate with artificial light, but the body will live in a situation of biological darkness, despite the fact it's light in this room. One reason is that we have to wear clothes when we live outside the equatorial area. The other reason is that in most working situations, we are not allowed to go out of the sunlight at a time when it was best suited for biological mechanisms. When would that be? High noon, of course, at 12 o'clock, or at 1 o'clock in a Central European summertime. If you go to the sun at 5 o'clock, as frequently recommended, you also have to eat more vitamin D, because long-waved UVA will destroy the vitamin D which has been formed in the deep layers of the skin and chop them up into small fragments. So the behavioral rules which we have is that you go to the sunlight in the afternoon, late afternoon. This also points to the direction of vitamin D deficiency. And of course, if you've noticed that, then you may have gone to a doctor and have had your vitamin D balance tested. But in the general population in Germany, we're talking about 70 to 80% vitamin D deficiency, with an associated increase of mortality, increase in breast cancer and other types of cancer.
Now, in the remaining 2 minutes, during the remaining 2 minutes, I will talk about the quality of different artificial sources of light. You have the thermal light, similar to fire, then the sunlight right at the center with its harmonious color distribution. Here you have the color distribution on a visual scale, and then the energy-saving light bulb, where you have these peaks in the indigo blue area. Now, the mercury evaporation lamp, and this is what you have to call the energy saving. Now, it is exciting, mercury, and then you have a specific fingerprint of such a kind where the photons are 406, 435, 546 photons, for example. These are very, very intensive, for example, when it comes to the light of the discharge lamps, and they would intrude even deeper than just the vascular level into the skin. And now the mercury spectrum is always the same, meaning you talk about difference from 5 to 10% in a continuous spectrum. But if you saw these graphs for full spectrum bulbs, they have been edited. And it's only correct if you have one peak with 100%. The highest has to be with 100, and all the others are obviously lower. But if you see this here, which is much wider, with a wider distribution, and all peaks go up to the 100%, then the spectrum will even go up higher. But I saw this several times. So now the human body as a resonating aerial, you need a sender and receiver at the same tune. If you have mercury molecules and atoms in your body, then certain interactions can be expected when the mercury from the lamp hits it. It's toxical substance, mercury, and it is liquid in room temperatures. And you also know that the hat makers were a little crazy, not just with Lewis Carroll, but also in other circumstances. There's also high affinity with the fatty systems, the nervous system with the Wunsch discs are rather susceptible for this, and the energy creation in the mitochondria is disturbed, and the photosynthesis is inhibited. And if you recalculated how much mercury do we have in our body, if we have so many micrograms that we absorb, for example, and if you have 10 to the power 14 cells, and the 1 mole of mercury is 6.0 to 3 times 10 to the power 28. And TMSL, for example, was used as a mercury substance for conserving food, for example, and a baby, for example, has 90 to 450 billion mercury atoms just by the vaccinations. This is 4,500 mercury atoms per bodily cell, and then drinking water, 1 microgram is 3 times 10 to the power 15 mercury, and mercury is also photoactive substance. So anorganic substances can be transformed into metallic or mercury compositions. When it comes to the exposure to mercury-based light, it can be even worse. Human beings are full of pigments, not just specifically absorbing substances. All substances are absorbed by the pigments, and if you look at the color pods, so to speak, then these small color pods are by real sunlight topped up like this. In this distribution, fire would fill up the color pods a little less, and the light bulb, traditional light bulb, is almost the same. Also in infrared A, you have a stronger activity. Day and night should lead to a compensated pigmenting budget. But if you're a Central European and you move to Australia, then you can have stress reactions because there may be a spillover effect for some of the color pods. And the last image is, for example, the topping up of the color pods when it comes to the energy-saving light bulbs. A lot of blue, and if you remember, then the blue under natural circumstances will also correlate to the content of UV. And so the signal is outside there is UV, and in future there will be vitamin D, and so you're actually misleading your body. And the last but one slide is health as a rhythmical coherence in the overall organism. I would like not to go into this, but here, the map for quantum physicists, this is where you have them mirrored, and this is a map that you can download at unihedron.com, may I recommend this to you because you can learn a lot about photons and light, and with 49 minutes and 19 seconds, I'm terribly sorry for having been a little long, but thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.